If you've been with this vlog for years, you know that song is reserved for road trips down US 95 from Reno to Vegas, and it is always good to be back. I start the trip off by meeting up with Jeff Boski for some Detroit-style pizza at Pizza Rock in Henderson, and if you were to ask me if it's the best freaking pizza I've ever had in my life, I would have a hard time saying no, though I still recommend JJ's Pie Company, 5th and Ralston, Reno, Nevada. After that, I shoot across town and arrive at my favorite place in Vegas to play poker, the Win/Encore. There were a ton of players on hand for a tournament series going on, and I'll admit, had I realized that was happening when I booked this trip, I might have rescheduled due to who tends to come to Vegas for those sorts of series. But I'd get on the $2,500, $1,500 max buy-in list, and there would be a short wait, so I would play a couple hands in the Carolina Poker Club on the ClubGG app. By the way, even though 5-10 are my preferred stakes, in general the game looked extremely shark-infested, and I opted to stick with 2-5, which is a game that has been very good to me over the years at Win. I'd buy in for $1,500 with the first hand coming 20 minutes into the session when I picked up pocket queens and raised to $55 over a $20 open. He thinks about it for longer than I'd expect and makes the call. And with 115 in, I flop top set on Queen Jack 3 with 2 hearts. He checks, and I elect to fast play this bad boy, betting 60 here. He thinks about it for a minute and lays it down. Perhaps a slow play would have worked, but I doubt it. I'd raise Jack 10 of spades and get called by the same opponent in the next hand. I wouldn't flop anything but a gut shot this time on 6, 7, 8, 2 clubs, but I'd fire a C-bet anyway. One thing you can count on in poker is when you don't get action on a huge hand, you will get it on the subsequent bluff. And that's what happened here. I bet, he called, and I folded to his turn donk lead on the 6 of diamonds. Then the 5-6 offsuit proved to be more lucrative than I would have guessed. I flopped a pair of 5s and called a small bet with it. Turn got checked through, allowing me to river 2 pair, but both of my opponents folded so fast, it felt like my 5s may have been good anyway. Then I picked up 2 red aces in the small blind, facing a $15 open from +1. I'm not going to show him, but he was an older gentleman wearing a COVID mask and plastic gloves. Now, what part of that should indicate that he's going to be willing to put money at risk without the nuts? I'm always kind of fascinated about things like that now, by the way. It's like you can look at guys and determine how risk adverse they probably are. Not always, but probably are based on factors like that. I figured I had to go less than 3x here, whereas I would normally default to 4x in live games in these spots. Anyway, he calls, as does one other, and with 125 in, the flop comes Queen 10-7 rainbow, and I bet 60. The risk-adverse gentleman snap folds, not a surprise, and, to my disgust, the other guy mucks as well. We then get a button limp, and I raise to 25 with ace-queen out of the small blind. The big blind calls, as does the limper. So with 75 in, the flop is Queen 7-4 with a couple of spades, giving me top pair, top kicker. I bet out for 50, and the big blind mucks, but the button doesn't. So with 175 in, the turn is the ace of diamonds. Hoping that he has a big draw here, I opt to bet out for a black chip, hoping he'll continue to try and draw to it. He thinks about it for a minute and folds, with that ace clearly serving as nothing more than an action killer. So if you couldn't tell by now, the game was not great. Pretty tight and pretty tough. So much so that I ended up calling a $50 raise with 6-7 of clubs, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I then flopped a flush. That I would recommend. Unfortunately, I didn't get more than $35 out of it, as the pre-flop raiser folded to my check raise. So, even though the game wasn't great, I still felt like I had somewhat of an edge in it. And hey, we got 2 LCS games going on to watch, so that's pretty cool too. A little later, the hijack makes it 15 over a limp, and I have ace jack in the big blind and make the call with the +1 limper completing. And with 45 in it comes ace, king, queen, rainbow, and I check. Hijack bets 20 here, and I make the call with +1 going out. So with 85 in, the turn is the 5 of clubs, and I check again. This time he bets 25, and once again, I check call. So with 135 in, the river is the 9 of clubs, and I check a third time here, and he decides to bet $65. Everything about this guy just screams to me that he's a good player. Young Asian American guy in a hoodie who shuffled his chips well and bought in for the max, mostly in black chips, and is willing to bet fold flops. That's literally all I know about him. And while none of these factors are 100% reliable, in a general sense, they're usually ones you can count on. It's also just very rare that someone will bet all 3 streets with a hand worse than ace-jack here. The only hand I can beat, obviously, is ace-10. I lose to ace-king, ace-queen, kings, queens, ace-5, ace-9, king-9, and pocket nines. So I decided to just throw my pair of aces away here. It's not sexy, but in a tough lineup, if I'm going to win, I know I'm going to have to make some tough folds like this. I then 3-bet ace-king to 75 and get 2 callers, both of which folded when the flop came king, jack, jack, and I bet 110. We then saw the biggest pot since I'd been in the game. Take a look at the board. It came in a 3-bet pot in which I had mucked ace-queen pre-flop. But the small blind who had opened, he had called a 3-bet with ace-jack from the guy on his left, who ended up jamming the river but never exposed his hand because the guy that won ended up showing that he had aces and jacks before he actually made the call. And once he did, the other guy never had to show his hand at all. It was a truly bizarre hand, and I guess a tight fold for me, but one that was beneficial in that spot. I then, for the first time ever, in just a random game, encounter just another random vlogger. Not sure who this guy is, but he's definitely a tough player, as pretty much everyone in this game is. In fact, this video is a pretty accurate depiction of the lineup right now.
This is a mid-session update. Some of you may not know this. I actually just learned it for myself today. But playing in poker games that suck is much less profitable than playing in ones that don't suck.
I've always liked the hand 9-10 suited over the years, but I must say, the love has been unrequited. Here are 2 examples. I raised 9-10 of hearts and flop an open-ender, but ended up getting check-raised by the big blind. I called said check-raise, but folded to his $160 turn bet when the board paired, which was obviously the last thing that I wanted to see. We then get 4 limps. I have 9-10 of spades in the big blind and make it 30. 3 limpers elect to call here, so with 125 in, the flop comes king 10-4 with 2 spades. Pair and a flush draw, and I bet 35. Plus 2 calls. Cutoff thinks about it for a minute and raises 150 more. I don't like the idea of 3-betting here because, as I've stated in a general sense, not always, but generally speaking, when someone raises a bet post-flop, they're never folding in these 2-5 games. So I elect to just call. Under the gun 1, who I was hoping would fold here, calls as well. So with 680 in, the turn is the jack of clubs. I check, plus 1 checks, and the cutoff, as you can see, bets 400. That's my cue to exit, especially because this other guy could easily have queen jack of spades or the nut flush draw here. He would ultimately spend about 2 minutes thinking about it before folding as well. Flopping pairs plus non-nut flush draws over the years has almost always resulted in the same outcome. It's the one that people attribute to pocket aces. You either win a small pot or lose a big one. And after flopping top pair with a queen kicker and being up against top pair with a king kicker, I'd managed to turn a $200 win into a $300 loss at this point. Action started picking up. Problem was, most of these guys were tough, and booking a win on this night was not going to be easy, as I mentioned, because the game wasn't getting any better as the night was going on, and none of the other games in the room appeared to be much better than that either. I 3-bet to 60 with ace-queen of diamonds, and that resulted in the first 4-bet I'd seen all day. And since I was out of position, I opted to fold to it, but certainly didn't love doing so. That then takes us to this hand, one that I'm still kind of coming to grips with, and I have no one to blame but myself. I look down at pocket queens +1 and make it 20, which results in 3 guys calling me. With 85 in, the flop is queen 8-3 with a couple of diamonds, and for the second time on the evening, I have flop top set of queens. I bet 50 here. The guy on my immediate left then raises to 125, forcing everyone else out. Now, I don't know a lot about this guy, but he did appear to be a little tilted from some other hands that I wasn't involved in. So my thought at the time was that I could smooth call here, and I could get another barrel out of him on the turn. Wasn't the right thing to do, but I can't always show you the right thing to do. I can only show you what I did. And I did indeed smooth call. So with 335 in, the turn is an offsuit 4, and I check, expecting that second barrel to come. He doesn't take too long with it, then checks back. The river is an offsuit 7. Now I figured I had to bet, hoping he did have some sort of a pair and might think I'm on a misdraw here. I make it 175, and he barely thinks about it for a minute and folds. I have to tell you, I haven't been so disgusted in myself in a long time for a hand I've shown on this vlog. This was egregious. I cannot believe I screwed up this hand so badly to not charge his draws on either street by either raising the flop or barreling the turn myself. In a tough game like this, it's just indefensible. I should have known that he was likely just to check back and hope to hit his draw. It's a mistake that I just show, so you guys can hope to not make the same one. I then raise ace-king, get a couple of callers, but didn't hit anything and had to give it up. And then I do the same with ace-queen. Definitely a frustrating session. Though one good thing was after 5 hours of play, an end seat finally opened up, so the video quality can be improved. First hand I play in that new seat comes when an aggressive player from Spain opens to 20, and I call him with 8-10 of diamonds and have the focus wrong on my camera, but that's okay. I then go on to flop top pair on a monotone board, but he wouldn't bet. He'd call my $20 bet on the turn, and then I rivered trip 8s, and he paid me off when I put 3 green chips into the pot. I then picked up pocket aces, but it was against, probably, my toughest opponent in the game, and I knew I wasn't going to get much action out of him. He did end up calling my $60 3-bet and a tiny flop bet with his pocket 5s on king 8, but folded when I bet the turn. We get a couple of limps, and the player on my right makes it 50 in the small blind. I look down at ace-king in the big blind. As I mentioned, this guy is tough. He'd later tell me he was one of these guys who dropped out of college because he was crushing at poker so hard. Anyway, I just hate the idea of isolating him. He's just never going to give me a ton of action unless I'm beat. Now, both of the limpers seem looser than he is, so I figured the play was to just call the 50 and make this a multi-way pot. And sure enough, that happens as they both call, creating a $200 pot, and the flop comes king, jack, deuce, rainbow, and the small blind checks. I bet 125 here, and MP1 is my only caller. So with 450 in, the turn is a 4. I bet 220 here, and he thinks about it for a minute, and mucks. The struggle to get action on my good hands continues on this night. Under the gun opens to 20, and I call +1 with 9-7 of spades. The small blind, this vlogger, makes the call. And the big blind, this Spanish guy, calls as well. So at 75 in, the flop is ace 6-7 with 2 hearts. Despite being in the under the gun +1 position, I'm last to act in this 4-way pot. And he gets checked to me, and I felt this was really close, but I ultimately opted to check back. And the turn is a 7 of hearts, giving me trips. But never even for a second did I feel great about this hand against these 3 opponents. The small blind bets out 50 with the big blind going out. Under the gun, snap calls that bet, and I figured that was the best course of action for me here as well. So with 225 in, the river is the jack of diamonds, and now the small blind checks. Under the gun, bets out for 125, and my assumption immediately was that he had a very similar hand in terms of strength to mine. That assumption would ultimately be proven accurate. I call the 125, expecting the small blind to either fold or maybe call with a hand that I beat here, but certainly if I raise, he's not going to call with the hand that I beat. And raising is what he does. He puts $400 in there without even thinking about it. He wastes no time, and under the gun, knows he's in a really tough spot, kind of stuck in the middle in this hand, and he folds what he would later tell me to be the case 7. So it's back on me. And if there is a world where guys can play super solid poker for 6 straight hours and then check raise bluff 2 guys off trips or possible flushes on the river with barely more than a min raise, then that's a world that I've never lived in. All right, so I have got to believe that he has, at minimum, a big flush here. So I fold this hand. I didn't get a look at his. But if you think folding that hand stung, you're probably right. I then got a little back, though, when I flopped the nut flush draw. I never ended up hitting said flush, but I did turn an ace, which was good enough to get me a couple of streets of thin value. But I lost all of that money back and then some in a hand that I didn't get on tape when I 3-bet a guy when I had ace-jack thinking that he was fairly weak, and I was right, as he only had queen 10. Problem was, his hand improved to a queen-high flush, and my hand didn't improve at all, and I did the betting. As you can see, that was problematic for me. I didn't get a raise in front of me, and I looked down at aces, but, as you probably guessed, my small 3-bet got a fold with ace-jack being shown here. The game then fizzled out at about 11:45 p.m. with the few remaining players going to other tables. As I've said in the past, my policy is I only play past midnight if the game is insanely good, which, as I don't have to tell you at this point, this one clearly wasn't, so I simply rack up and book the loss.
All right, before I do anything else, let me get one more plug in for the PEPPERMILL PokerPALOOZA. If you're just seeing this when this video comes out, you still got time to make it out with the main event happening at the end of the week starting on the 28th. So you can use promo code DEECH, 20% off your stay at PEPPERMILL Reno. If you've never been, this is the perfect time to come. I'm telling you, these tournament fields in Reno are going to be softer than tournament fields and pretty much anywhere else you're going to play. So I highly recommend it, and I'm certainly expecting the cash games to be fantastic as well. As far as this session, one that I am not going to relive happily, that's for sure. I don't think I've ever been quite as disappointed with myself for just one play in one hand in vlog history as I am with that hand with the pocket queens. That was so obviously a re-raise and not a slow play. It's not even funny when you factor in even a number of things that I may not have even mentioned, but it's one of those situations where when you misplay it like that, even though I won the hand, if you misplay it like that, you just kind of get that feeling of, man, this is a tough game. That was my opportunity, and I missed it. To get some value out of something. As you saw, it was just like pulling teeth, getting value out of my good hands in this game. And it was just, quite frankly, I think, probably the toughest lineup that I've played in quite some time, which here in Vegas, that can happen. And I think that it was because of the fact that there's this tournament series going on here at Wynn, which I didn't even know about until I came down here, which is gonna be a big part of the reason why the field is this tough. And you know, when you start getting European players in here, that's when you know you're in trouble. I'm not saying I can't beat them. I'm just saying it's going to be much tougher to beat them because when guys come over here from Europe to play, it's always the really good players that come. You never have the guys who are good for the game come over here because they're staying there to do their jobs, where it's only going to be the pros that come over here because they're pros. That's the kind of thing they do. Anyway, that's why whenever you see European guys in these games in the United States, generally speaking, it's terrible for the games. I have one more vlog from Vegas coming up. Hit the like and subscribe button so you can be alerted when that video is going to come out. And I think I'm going to shoot that vlog in a place I have not played in a long time. Long time.